All right. Yeah, welcome everyone to Young Migrants, Getting Migrant Voices Heard. My name's Aarnav, and I'd like to start today's event with an acknowledgement of country. I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, as well as to their emerging leaders. And I extend that respect to all First Nations people here today. Sovereignty was never ceded, this always was and will be Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander land, and we recognise their ongoing connection to land, waterways, and air. Before we kick off, just a bit of housekeeping to get out of the way. Just so everyone is aware, we will be recording today and someone will also be monitoring the chat. So if you want to reach out or ask a question, just drop it in the chat. Captions will also be enabled for all viewers. We're delighted to have everyone with us today. We've worked very hard to pull this event together. For those who don't know, this project came about as part of our work on the campaign program with AYAC. During our time on campaign, we realized that we've all had shared experiences as young migrants and wanted to play a role in getting our voices heard. And after working up our ideas for a plan for action, we pitched our ideas to MYAN, who very enthusiastically agreed to work with us, and AYAC helped us to try and turn our ideas into reality. So what's actually on today's agenda? Well, we'll be having an informal conversation with some experienced young advocates from migrant backgrounds who will be sharing their experiences of advocacy, hopes for the future, and any guidance they think might benefit other young migrants on their advocacy journeys. We'll then take a 5-minute comfort break and return for some breakout rooms where we can connect, share experiences, and reflect on what was said by the speakers. After that, we'll finish up with some Q&As. For reference, we'll be finishing up around 5 p.m. Eastern and 3 p.m. Western. So without further ado, I'd like to pass over to Neeja, who will be guiding us through the conversation with our speakers. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Aarnav. So let's introduce our speakers who'll be sharing their experience and thoughts with us today. So our first speaker is Nayonika. Nayonika, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Hey everyone, I'm Nayonika. I use she, their pronouns, and I'm based in Warong, or what you call Sydney. I'm a lawyer by profession, but I've had multiple hats throughout the years. I first started working when I was 13. I started as a baker. I then was a wedding photographer, and I'm now a lawyer. So if that tells you anything, you can do whatever you really want to do. But I'm really excited to be here and sharing my thoughts. I'm of Indian background. I grew up in the Middle East, so the concept of, everywhere and nowhere and somewhere being home is a very common one that I know.
That's really powerful and incredible journey as well. Thanks, Nayonika. Our second speaker is Ikram. Ikram, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Ikram. I use she, her pronouns. I am a Somali-Australian, so I was born and raised in Nam, but I moved to Kenya for a few years when I was a teenager and then came back to Australia again, so bit of a journey as well. But I currently work as a project officer at the Centre for Multicultural Youth, so I run some pretty incredible programs for young multicultural people. And I also run a grassroots initiative called the Beginning Project, which is all about connecting young people in the west side of Melbourne with opportunities and resources to reach their full potential as well.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. That's amazing. Thanks very much, Ikram. Our final speaker is Kano. Kano, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Krishandevsi or Kano. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm currently coming in from Wadawurrung or Bunurong country in Victoria at the moment. And can I just say it's such a pleasure to be here today, to join you. I know it's a long weekend tomorrow for a lot of us, so I thank you for taking out the time to be here today. And a little bit about me. It's interesting, right? I wasn't your typical advocate person. Going to be very honest, I experienced a bit of racism growing up when I was in school, and I was like, I want to raise a voice against this. And so I started to volunteer at different organizations, such as the one Ikram works at Center for Multicultural Youth, one in different levels, and then apparently found myself as an advocate, advocating for things, advocating for my voice. And I think as young people, we may not have the experience or the expertise, but what is so key for us is our time and our voice matters. And so I do some of that work through my own organization at Third Culture, where we go into schools, we work with organizations to create places where all of us can belong into. And I hold a very political, boring role at the Victorian Multicultural Commission as a youth commissioner, where I'm working with policymakers, working with governments to make sure our voices, especially young people voices, multicultural young people in particular, they're heard and they're represented.
Amazing. That's really powerful, Kano. We are so thankful that you're all given up your time with us today. And we had a lot of themes come up in our discussions within campaign, and these questions really stem from them. So one of them was the importance of role models. And we wanted to ask, well, who are some of your role models that encouraged you during your advocacy? And what did you learn from them as well? Ikram, would you like to kick us off?
I would love to. Thank you so much, Nirja, for the question. I think for me, when I was having a bit of a think, it was pretty hard to think of an exact person where I was like, this is the role model that I had from, 5 years old until now. But I'd say probably growing up, I didn't really see people who looked like me in spaces of influence, like especially in the media. I didn't see people who looked like me, whether it was a hijabi or African young woman. But one experience that I do remember was a hijabi news reporter. And I think this was 2020, 2021, when we were in lockdown at home. And this was the first time that I saw someone who looked like me. And I remember getting my phone, and I was like taking photos, like, oh my goodness, I've never seen this before. And the reason why I sort of bring up this story as well is because a few years later, I did end up applying for an ABC role. It was an internship and it was all about storytelling and supporting young high schoolers to share their stories. And back then, I didn't realize it, but seeing that hijabi woman on screen kind of planted that seed of like, this is something that I could do. Because growing up when I was in high school, I never considered, working at the ABC or working in different spaces where I didn't see people like myself. I was sort of told, growing up, there are a couple of options for you. There's, being a doctor, being a lawyer, being a nurse, and these are respectful fields that you should be going into. So when I saw someone owning their path, owning their step, and going into this space, I was like, this is something that I wanted to do. And I think the sort of key thing that I did take away from there is that number one, representation is important. It's good to have people in all these different spaces that you can look up to. But even if there isn't that representation in that space, for you to become that representation, to, provide that sort of uplift and support for people who are coming up as well. But if there was like one thing that really left me with is that there is a lot of power when it comes to representation. It could be representation when it comes to media, but it could be simple representation, whether it's in your schools, whether it's in university and all these sorts of stuff as well. But it's definitely something that I look back on and I'm like, I'm so glad that I had that experience. Like it really did support me in my advocacy journey, seeing people who are kicking and doing amazing things as well.
Absolutely. I love the way you put that, and that really resonates with myself, and I think a lot of us here today. Thank you for that. And Kana, what about you? How has been your experience around this theme of role models?
Yeah, interesting question. I think growing up, I didn't really have a role model. So it's a bit of context. I was born in India. I moved here at the age of 7. And this is in 2007 where, diversity, inclusion, multiculturalism wasn't a hot topic that was talked about. It wasn't a topic that you would see on a webinar, for example, or it's not a topic that you would see talked about at school. And so at that time, I didn't really have that language. And so I think instinctively, I think my role models were my parents, because I saw them, even though I didn't have the words, I saw them struggling to, find a job, but to make money, to put food on the table, to secure citizenship, to secure a house. So I think seeing them push a lot of barriers, because to see them, one, not being able to confidently speak English in a culture where, it's not their norm. So I saw them and like, yeah, they're pushing a lot. They're really pushing barriers to make things happen for me and my family, for my sister. And so I think they were my first role models to be like, you can push through things. You can break barriers, which might not be for you. You can make space for yourself where there might not be space for you. So I think they were my big role models growing up. And then I got into high school and into my early years as a young person. I think my first role model was YLab Ali. If you know him, he's on channel. I think he's on The Project. And I saw him like, whoa, that's a brown man with a beard, being on mainstream television, talking about world politics and the issues happening. I was like, that's cool, that could be me. And I think that's when I realized the importance of representation. That's when I realized the importance of having someone to look up to. Because I think sometimes being in the sector where we might be the minority, it's very tough to look in those high-level decision-making arenas and be like, I could be there. Or this young person, or me being a multicultural person, or me being a refugee, or me being from this group, I can be in that space. But I think having that one person look up to, well, I think definitely played that role in me. And the other, a bit of a nuanced one, I would take a different take, is you can look for role models outside of our world, right? I think my biggest role models came from social media, right? YouTube was big back then, TikTok, right? I saw people in America, in the UK, who weren't necessarily from Australia, but they looked like me. They talked about, Indian or South Asian issues, and like, that's really cool. So if you don't have a role model that's from your community in Australia, there's absolutely no reason why you can't find them online. I think we have access to incredible role models, good ones, hopefully positive ones, through our devices, and definitely find them as well. And my biggest tip if you don't find representation, if you don't find like people like you, there's absolutely no reason why that can't be you, right? Why you cannot be that representation for the next generation. So I think being a role model, or that the role model plays, is huge, especially as a young person, to look up to someone, to see how they speak, to see how they introduce themselves, to see how they navigate different arenas. And there's absolutely no reason why you can't be that person. Eventually, when you get the confidence and the skills, 100% be that role model for the next generation.
Absolutely. I think that's a really powerful insight. And like everyone can really step up if they want to be the role model. And media plays such a huge role in this as well, like Ikram and you mentioned. Nayonika, would you like to go next and share your experience around the theme?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'm just going to be borrowing a lot of the themes that both Ikram and Khan have shared. And I think that really just speaks to the migrant experience in general, right? Which is something I've learned is you and all of us have inspirations and role models in a lot of different people and in a lot of different experiences. It's not just one thing that you sort of look at and go, this person is my role model for exactly this reason. And I think that's almost the beauty of being a migrant, which is you tend to look at life with a really different perspective. You appreciate what you want to belong to, you appreciate what you are belonging to, and you appreciate what you're about to create and where you will belong. So I think you have a lot of sources of inspiration, and you have a lot of different kind of role models as well, because something a lot of people don't recognize is when you're growing up as a migrant is that you're stuck in this in-between world of this is how you've been taught to be, but then this is how the new community expects you to be. And then there's this very weird third space of you that's like, how do I want to be? And what's the right way to be? So I think you'll find that role models look different. And I think, as Ikram said, you know, growing up, my role models have changed consistently over the years. I've gone from like looking at sports people, looking at, you know, presenters, looking at people who've gone from raising the glass ceiling and saying women are doing more, through recognizing and looking at other young people like me and going, actually, we can just be doing it ourselves. I don't need someone to speak for us. But I think the most consistent, I think, source of inspiration for me has been mum and dad. It's very cliche, but as Kano said, it's watching your parents show up for you when they don't know how bad things can be or how good things can be, or they just don't know how things are, probably don't speak the language, don't know what the bureaucracy or red tape navigation looks like, and they still do it. I mean, it's a running thing. I keep saying, you know, your biggest anger will be with your migrant parents, but your biggest love will also be for your migrant parents because they hold the pieces of you together regardless of how many ever times you fall apart. Sometimes they might not understand what your crisis is, but they're there for you. And I think just recognizing that has been a really big thing for me. But just beyond that, I think young people, like biggest role model. I love the genuine, respectful audacity young people have because they are not here to be told what doesn't belong to them, what cannot be theirs, what cannot be challenged. It's just the sheer determination of like, this is ours, there's a future to this planet, there's a future to the community, and we should care about it is so powerful to feel every time I'm around young people. So that's fantastic. But yeah, that's it for me. Thank you for the question, Neeja.
Absolutely. Another theme that came up was around culture and expectations. So the question I wanted to ask was, well, how does being your experience navigating between different cultures and expectations? And Nayonika touched on this as well, but yeah, would love to know more as well about your experiences. Carter, would you like to begin this theme?
Yeah, look, I must say it's a very big topic. I think it's a very tough topic to live between two different cultures, and there is no one tells you how to do it. There is no how-to guide, and it's different for every culture, right? We can make a book on it on how to survive as a multicultural kid, but then we understand being from all different parts of the world, and even when you're from the same country, what region you're from, what background you're from, it plays such a huge factor. I think it can be very challenging. I know when I was growing up, I was like, why is mum give me curry and rice to school when all my friends are bringing like Nutella sandwiches or ham and cheese sandwiches, right? I just want to have that. Or why is my mum calling me and then I have to speak my mother tongue, right? Why can't she be like other mums? And, you know, or even the biggest one is parent-teacher interviews, right? For context, my family's not very well educated. My mum only studied till grade 5. And so taking her to a public teacher interview was very tough because she couldn't speak English very well, didn't understand the schooling system coming from a different country and the Australian system. And so I was talking to my teacher, being that interpreter there, and knowing I can say whatever I want to, but then also a part of me is like, I can't ask for help from my parents for homework, or I can't ask for guidance on career advice or other advice, whether that's financial advice or even that's just general well-being. So there's a part of me, there's a bit of resentment that grew in me growing up. I was like, why am I Indian? Why do I have to live this migrant life? Why couldn't I just grow up to be like everyone else? Why couldn't I have just grown up in a typical quotation marks white family? I think so, and that eventually results into that racism that I have for myself, right? That personal racism. I forgot the word, but there is a word for it. Ikram or Nayonika, if you know it, please mention in the comments. I forgot it today. But that internalized racism, right? Or if I wasn't proud of myself. There we go, Dean. That's my guy. But then eventually, right? I think as I got older, I realized that, hey, the things that I have in my body, the color of my skin, my culture, the way I speak, I can't change it. I can't use a bioscope and change this. The only thing I can do is learn to accept it, to learn my good and the bad. And I think that little switch played a big role in me accepting my biculturalism, right? I'm a bicultural kid. I've always been a bicultural kid. I cannot change it. What I can do is learn to accept it, learn to accept the cards that I've been dealt with, and turn them to my strength. I am very proud to now be a mix of Aussie and a mix of Indian, right? I love that I can watch content from so many different worlds. I can listen to music in 3 different languages. I can eat foods, from different cultures and be totally fine with it. I can go to India and somewhat feel comfort. I can come to Australia and feel, go in the bush and feel at comfort. So I think initially it was very challenging for me to live between these 3 cultures and be like, why can't I just be one? Why can't I have a home to go in? Why do I have to figure out what my home looks like? But I think over time, I love that journey of figuring out, all right, where do I fit into this bucket? And some things I do want to be more Indian, and some things I do want to be more Australian. But that's a choice that I get to make. And I think that was very powerful knowing that that's a choice that I can make. And that's a choice that you as a multicultural person can make of, this is where I want to fit in. This is my identity that I want to bring into this. And I think having that comfort of knowing, okay, a lot of things I can't change. What I can do is own it. And then decisions that I make, are up to me. And also be proud of the culture that you come from. As I said, it is very special to be from a multicultural background. Not everyone has a multicultural background. It's to learn to embrace it and to love it as well. Make it your strength, right? Make that identity your strength.
Absolutely. That's an amazing insight. Was there a particular moment or experience that really shaped you, in experience?
Look, I don't want to make a negative tone, but I do remember, I guess, in year 10 where, students would make fun of my culture and, being from an Indian background, people would make fun of me that my parents work at Telstra, or you look like a poo from The Simpsons, all the things that you would typically hear. And none of it really got into me, right? I have quite thick skin. I've heard everything under the roof. But this one student, especially in year 9, kept on calling me these mean racist things every single session, until it got to the point where he called me a black dog. And I was like, no, I'm not going to accept that, right? I don't want to accept that. Why should I go to school and feel like I don't belong? Why should I go to school and feel like I can't be myself? Because I can't get rid of the color of my skin. Why should I change that? And so I brought up to my teacher at the time, and I'm like, hey, sir, this is one student who's been calling me these mean racist things. Can you please do something about it? And it still gets me to this day. The teacher goes to me that the things aren't racist, and that I should just learn to accept it. And I remember Neeja being at that time was like, nah, surely this can't be correct. Surely the things that I've heard are not appropriate. Surely these things should not be heard by young students. And I remember going home being frustrated, angry. I didn't know what was happening. And then I think that goes back to your first question. I started to look up role models. I started to look at people that I could look up to and be like, and I saw them accepting their identity. I think that year 9, that year 10 experience was a big switch for me to be like, no, I'm not going to accept these things that people are saying about me. I'm not going to accept the portrayal of multicultural communities by the media or by other people. And so I have a voice. I'm going to raise it at my school. And then also when I graduated from school, there's absolutely no reason why I can't continue raising my voice, whether that's in political forums, whether it's in roundtables and consultations, being part of organizations like this. There's absolutely no reason why I can't use my lived experience. Unfortunately, a bad lived experience for positive growth and hopefully for positive change making.
Absolutely, that's really powerful. Nayonika, over to you, and the theme of culture and expectations.
Yeah, I think I've got a bit of a different experience, and I'm sorry you've had such a poor experience, Connor, and I'm sure a lot of us have had those experiences, but hopefully it moves towards better of culture and expectation. Reckon with and recognize a lot is that both of them are not monolithic or constant experiences. Both culture evolve, and expectations from ourselves, from community, of us, from family, from acquaintances, from outsiders, so people who are outside community and look at community as a perfect entity. I think that constantly evolves, right? And I think I briefly mentioned this before. It's sort of like a Pokemon evolution game, right? Culture and community, we're all evolving. There are different stages. There are different battles you battle it out over. And I think you have to pick your fights as well, because it's really hard to have a singular concept that you can stick by and be like, look, this is my culture, this is my community, and this is the only expectation you can have of me. Because it's unfair to the other people in your community and your peers as well who are going through such similar experiences as well. I think my biggest clash and difficulty has been knowing how to do things respectfully, and how to do things without causing harm to culture and causing harm or detriment to what the community will experience as well. I think when you often have platforms like this, you have to do it very strategically, because I am speaking for myself, but I also know I look a certain way, I sound a certain way, I have a certain name, and those things will carry expectations as well, and those things will translate onto the culture I'm carrying with me as well. So there's a lot of nuance, but there's a lot of fragility as well behind it. But I think it also puts a lot of pressure. So the other thing I've had to recognize is it's okay to have fun with culture and expectations. It's okay to be experimentative. It's okay to be colorful with it as well, because that's the whole point of it. Because everything's evolving and nothing's permanent, until you don't try what works for you, you actually won't figure out what works for the betterment, not of just yourself, but of your community as well. And every now and then, you have to be one of those people who steps out of line to test the boundaries. All of us sit within colonial constructed boundaries. A lot of these boundaries and expectations of like, this is what's good for you, this is what's acceptable, is very post-colonial thinking. And that's what you have to really challenge. You have to recognize, where is it acceptable? Why is it acceptable? And who is it acceptable to? So I think once you start challenging who those stakeholders are and who those people that you want to be interacting with are, it really takes away a lot of the pressure of going, my culture expects me to be this way. And if I'm not this way or that way, then my culture, my community will, sort of kick me out. But in having said that, I also want to acknowledge that there's also that very real fear of not having your community to fall back on, because you've stepped so out of line, that your community just doesn't know how to reconcile between what you've suggested, and between what is acceptable. So I think it's a balancing act, and I think it's one that requires acknowledgement of the fact that there's a lot of exhaustion when navigating culture and when navigating expectations. We live multiple lives at once. I'm not just Nayonika who's speaking to you. I'm Nayonika who's third culture kid, but who's Nayonika who's also the lawyer, but Nayonika who's also perceived as femme passing person, but Nayonika who also has this linguistic expectation. Nayonika who's also, firstborn daughter, and all of these different things. And I'm navigating all of these roles constantly. So a lot of the exhaustion I might feel, I can't often translate that and explain that to other people across the table. And that's why you need community. You need more people who experience things like us to be in the room, because then I can just look at someone and be like, you get it. You know what I'm talking about. I'm tired of, it's like how you code switch. I've been doing the code switch with life, but also just with my linguistic expectations as well. So I think it's a complex topic to unpack, as Kano said, and there's no easy answer, but I think make it your own thing. We all have our own experiences. Just make sure that you also take the liberty of connecting with people while you do it as well. Exploring culture, understanding expectations gets easier when you do it with friends. And the best way to do it is just to show up. Literally show up, say hello, As I say, be silly, goofy, ask people about themselves. I know it's really tempting to take a LinkedIn pitch approach and really get those critical questions out of the way. Don't do that. It's fine. Ask me about my favorite color. Actually, maybe not that. Maybe ask me about my favorite dish. Tired of the favorite color question. Ask me about my favorite movie. I will embarrassingly admit there are some bad movies in that list, okay? So make friendships that really matter, see people for who they are. Because when you feel like there's pressure from culture and from expectations, go and put that pressure back on other people. Take that pressure off as well. We don't need to be sitting in a pressure cooker. Like we don't need to be doing that. It's all a colonial expectation. So it's okay to break that and try and do things differently. Disappointment feels scary, but it's not a bad thing. And I'll leave it on that note and pass it on to you, Neeja.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being so open, both you and Kana as well. Yeah, what is your favorite food actually?
It depends on what time of the day you're asking me, but at the moment, I'm currently obsessed with mango sticky rice. I don't know why. I'm just obsessed with it.
That's a good choice. Thanks, Nayonika. Ikram, would you like to share your thoughts on this question?
Of course. And just even hearing, Kana and Nayonika share, I'm like having all these sorts of thoughts as well. But when I sort of think around, culture and expectation, I think about my own personal experiences growing up as, Somali. In our culture, there's, something called humility. And I think this is something that, a lot of different cultures have where it's like, you do the work, you put your head down, you're not necessarily sharing your work. It's meant to be the community who's like sharing your work, sharing your values. So I think for me, when I sort of moved to Kenya when I was younger, it was a bit of a culture shock in and of itself because growing up in Melbourne, it's a big thing around, you share you share the things that you value, you share the work that you're doing. And then when I went to Kenya, even things of like looking at an elder eye to eye and sharing these things, like I didn't realize at the time that, that was considered disrespectful. And even like tackling that was, very hard. And then coming back to Australia and then having that sort of growing up in Kenya for a few years and then getting used to that and then coming back to Australia again and then being like, what? I'm used to working hard and not having to express these sorts of things. It's like really hard. But I'd probably say, especially working in sort of professional and advocacy spaces, there is, like Nayonika was saying, like a lot of pressure, to be visible and all these sorts of things. And what I find myself stuck in is, do I share my work? Do I put myself out there? Do I share the advocacy work that I'm doing? Or do I just continue to put my head down, do the work, those sorts of things as well? But I think what I found really important is, and I know I sort of mentioned this earlier, is that representation is really important. If you're not the one who's putting that work out there, who is? I felt like sometimes, growing up, people sort of viewed that as cringe or people thought, no, that's performative, don't do that. But in reality, showing the impact, showing the work that's being done is critical. We want to see what's going on, what advocacy work is being done, how can we best support. It's really interesting because even Neeja and I met Neeja a couple of months ago with some of the amazing work that she's doing up in the West, and I'm doing some stuff in the West as well. So it's like if I never, either connected on Instagram or put some stuff on LinkedIn or even like what we did, Neeja and I just have a casual chat at a cafe. Like if we didn't do that, like who knows the work that we could have done in the future. So I think that sort of stuff is really important. And when it comes to what Nayonika was saying as well around exhaustion, when it comes to expectations, it definitely is there, especially with African culture. It's like you've got to, have a perfect job. You've got to have, this marriage and kids and like navigate all these different sorts of things. And it definitely is a lot of pressure. But I think the biggest thing that I've learned is not to take that pressure. It's like you've got to put yourself first, but also support, the people around you, because how can you give to others when you yourself, your cup isn't full as well? So that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice that I'd give, because myself, I've experienced various amount of burnout throughout the past few years because I was constantly giving, constantly putting into this space, which is amazing. But how can you continue to do that work is when you yourself also give back to yourself and your community gives back to you and all those sorts of stuff as well.
Absolutely. Prioritizing yourself is so crucial, as well as representation as well. So that's incredibly powerful. We also had another question, which was about the hopes and, hopes and reflection on future as well. So we wanted to ask all three of you guys, like, what are your hopes for the future? And what would you tell your younger self today if you could meet them? Nayonika, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to start with a disclaimer. I'm still young, so I'm still going to tell myself this thing. But on a more serious note, I think I am hopeful about everything. I think I'm hopeful about the way we look at the future of education. I'm hopeful about the way we challenge the status quo, the way we look at late stage capitalism and its impact on us, the way we consider our connection to the environment, the way we interact with Indigenous communities, not just in so-called Australia, but also across the world, and recognize land water systems and revive all of that. I think it's because young people are sort of taking back a lot of that consolidated power and recognizing that there's benefit in distribution, that there's no benefit in accumulation. I think I'm really hopeful that these conversations are happening so openly. But also like just the fact that it's like we've got so many multicultural young people on a call like this right now, and we're able to just talk about this is who I am. I think this kind of stuff just makes me very hopeful because, we're not here being little chess pieces in like a more complicated game. We're actually talking about and owning our own stories, which I think is absolutely fantastic. Something I would tell my younger self is that it's okay to be scared. You are going to be very, very, very terrified. Most of the time, I don't think that fear ever entirely goes away. But I think what you will learn is that you will find people and you will find ways to deal with the fear. And it's okay to be scared and still reach out to people. No one's going to think any less of you if you don't know how to do something. I still very frequently, like extremely frequently, still call up my colleagues and go, I don't know how to do this. Or I reach out to my mentors, I reach out to my friends in the industry and sort of go, need some advice, would love your insights on this. And I think community is what has taken me forward. And so I think reminding my younger self that, put energy, effort, consistency into friendships, into connections. A lot of those are really valuable. So I think that's what I'd really tell my younger self. Also, eat as much good chocolate and candy as you can, because you know what? After a certain point, like everything just starts hurting. So eat all of the good food that you can. And exercise a lot. That
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Nayonika. Ikram, how about you?
I think for me, I'm thinking about the exercise. I really need to take that piece of advice because I say it every year, but it's coming, it's coming. But for me, I'd probably say my biggest hope for the future is for young people, especially us from migrant backgrounds, that we don't have to shrink or change ourselves to be heard. I know, sort of mentioned a few times things around like code switching or having to fit in and out of different expectations. I hope that in future we can come as 100% selves, be fully back, be fully resourced, and don't have to consistently go through all these loops and hypes and all these sorts of stuff to just be taken seriously. I hope that's in the near future, and I know definitely with all the amazing people on the call today that it's going to happen. And I think if there was something that I'd tell my younger self, it would be like number one, you never know unless you try. I think for me personally, I have this big perfectionism sort of thing in me where it's like I won't do something until it's 1,000% good. Things with like whether it's a logo, whether it has to look perfect. But what I learned is that you just got to put the work out there. There are people there who want to support, who want to work with you. And most importantly, people want to see the journey. People don't want to see when, things are perfectly wrapped in a bow. They want to see how you got there, the sort of barriers that you went through. They want that support, all those sorts of stuff. So I think for me, that would be one of my biggest pieces of advice is just go for it. Don't wait. And also, you never know until you ask. I think people out there really do want to support, really want to give their insights where they can. So I know a lot of us sometimes feel like, oh, I don't know if I should ask this question. I don't know if I should reach out, but I would say reach out. 9 times out of 10, you will get a response. People do want to have those conversations. It's like we were saying before, it's all about connection and relationships. You'll sometimes want to come in with all these questions, but also forming those relationships are super, super important as well. And also telling myself that like I'm more capable than I think. I know sometimes we think that, oh, we still need to do this, we still need to learn this, but the lived experience, the things that you've gone through in life have built you to the person that you are today. So if I could look at myself in the mirror and be like, just do you, you're already there. You just need to keep on going. I think that's probably what I'd say to myself as well.
Absolutely. Thanks for that, Ikram. Kano, would you like to finish us off for today?
100%. So my big hope, team, is that we don't have to have these discussions anymore, right? That is my hope. I hope we can get to a point where young people, young multicultural people, our voices are embedded. And that comes from obviously us doing the advocacy work that we're doing now. And then also, I think a big part of that comes in eventually when we are a little bit older, we'll be in those decision-making rooms. We'll be the managers. We will be those big dogs. And so when we are in those positions, making sure we give up space, we create space for other young people to come in. And so we don't have to always do these consultations. It is a bit hopeful, but that is my vision where it just becomes practice as usual, right? Where young people, young multicultural voices, it's just embedded. We don't really have to think about it. And what I would tell myself, my younger self, 3 golden nuggets, 3 tips. I have written them down. That's how you know they're golden. Number 1 is to be open to the other side, to be open to looking at things from a different angle. I think sometimes growing up, you do feel like the adults are the issue or white people are the issue. Absolutely not, right? I think growing up, I would tell myself to be a bit more generous, a bit more open to listening to issues at a more holistic level. So opening myself up to discussions with older people, to open myself to have discussions with other people. So I think keeping myself open and not being so closed up in my one way or the highway type of things or political views. Number 2, and this is a big one, team. If you're advocating, if you're volunteering, this is a big one for you, which is opportunities will come back. Never ever feel like, oh my God, if I don't do this opportunity, it's never going to come back. My life is going to ruin. Absolutely not. Luckily in Australia, I can tell you there's so many opportunities. Do not feel like you have to sacrifice your health, your sleep, what your schedule looks like to make them happen. I can guarantee you opportunities will come back again. So don't feel like, yes, you will hear all the time, say yes to things. Absolutely. But also say no to things. If you can't do it, that is okay too. And the last thing, which is, I think for our sector, it's very important, is sometimes as young people, you may feel like you're only on the call, you're only in this space because of your lived experience. I'm here to tell you, yes, your lived experience is key, but make sure you remember that you're more than your lived experience. Before my lived experience, I am Kana. Before Ikram's or Nayonika's lived experience, they're themselves. And don't feel like your self-worth is tied to your lived experience only. You are more than that. And make sure you remember that when you're doing your advocacy, to not let your lived experience be the only thing that you're known for. You are way, way more than that. And don't feel like you have to share that lived experience every time you go. Absolutely not. Make sure you advocate for yourself and young people and not necessarily always be forced or be in a situation where you feel like you have to share your lived experience. Absolutely not.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your 3 golden nuggets. They were in fact really golden. Thank you everyone for sharing and answering our questions. I'm going to pass it on to Aarnav for the breakout room chats.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Neeja, and our panel. Let's get going into some breakout rooms now to chat, connect with each other, and reflect on some of the things that the speakers were saying. Go ahead and introduce yourselves, find out where everyone's from, and have a chat about what you've thought about the day so far, because there's plenty of good stuff to talk about. And do remember, we will be coming back with some questions, so if you run out of things to talk about, you can always think of what a good question is to ask. Off we go then. I'll see you all in a minute. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you had a great discussion. Beautiful. I hope you had a great discussion in the breakout and got to connect with others on the call. We'll now be moving on to our Q&A. I'm sure you all know the score. Raise your hands if you have a question, or feel free to use the chat if you would prefer. And as always, keep it respectful and constructive. So who's got the first question? Fantastic. So
We
we've
have a
got,
question in the chat.
we've got our first one here. So we've gone from Sasha. As an adult who grew up with the same experiences that you've all talked about, is there anything you would like to support? You would like from people like me to better support young migrants and young people? Now on to the panelists.
I can take it. I think great question, Sasha. Thank you for asking the question. I think the first thing is just acknowledging the experiences that have happened. I think sometimes being in these spaces, you feel like your people are being nice to you, or that tokenistic niceness because of this certain experience. I think it's just being genuine about it. Like, obviously, luckily my experience now that I'm a bit more older, it's not as big for me, but I think for newly arrived communities, they have gone through some big changes. They will definitely need more support. So I think being aware of that and not I think so recognizing that the experience that they've gone through, or recognizing the issues that I've gone through. I think when I was going through those issues in school, my biggest thing was my friends didn't know what I was going through, or my teachers didn't know what I was going through, or the workers that I was working with, they had no idea that I was going through this internal conflict of being bicultural or facing racism. So I think if my friends were, or people that I worked with were somewhat aware and recognized the issues that I'm going through, I think that made me a little more comfortable if I didn't want to raise any issues, or if I didn't want to ask for support, recognizing, okay, they understand my issue, they get what I'm coming from. I don't have to necessarily explain it. And so I think that made it easier for me to have someone, whether it's a worker or a support worker, understand my issues, or make it feel like they understand my issue, not in a tokenistic way, but in a genuine way.
And
If
I'm
I can
also
just jump, go for it.
Okay, cool. I was just going to quickly add on to what Kana was mentioning, especially that point around like genuine connection as well. When it comes to connecting with young people, especially multicultural communities, there tends to be this thing where people come to multicultural communities and over consult and ask, the sort of same questions again and again and again. And what ends up happening as well is, young people come, they're super excited, they share, but then we don't hear what happens afterwards. That feedback loop isn't closed. So for people who are working with multicultural communities, with migrant communities, the biggest piece of advice that I would give is, if you are consulting, if you are connecting with young multicultural people, let them know what you've done post, consultation, post connection. If you had a consultation and it was a thing where you were consulting about mental health within migrant communities, and you've gone on to do a particular thing, coming back, even if it's through email, through a call, and letting the people know, like, this is what we did. We heard you. Like that is really important, because it makes young people feel like, okay, at least my voice is being heard. I know this is the whole point around, our session today. So that's probably the biggest piece of advice I'd give, especially for support services. But over to you, Nayonika.
I think just jumping on the trend of genuineness, I think when you're showing up as an adult, the first and most important thing to recognize is that when you show up to a community, it's never going to be just pretty. Showing up to community, doing work with communities is not a manicured experience. I want to highlight and point out that there's often a very generous expectation that all of us are very polite, put together, have immaculate English, and can articulate our thoughts very clearly. I have immense amount of privilege to be able to do this here today. There's generations and there's giants behind me who've allowed me to do this. And I'm sure the other speakers probably have giants before them as well who have given them this platform. With that notion, community is imperfect, right? So when you show up to community, you have to have the patience to be there and to engage with them, even when you're frustrated, even when you're tired, even when you're annoyed and you don't understand how to do it, because that's how community builds connection and builds trust. It won't always be easy, but you have to exercise that patience. And I think the other thing, as Ikram pointed out as well, is stop waiting for things to be perfect before you engage with community. Don't come to me with a perfect DEI plan before you get people from the DEI background to speak to us about things. Just give things a crack, right? Give things an imperfect start, but get community involved, get people involved, because if you're waiting for the perfect circumstances for all people to be in the right place at the right time, it's not going to work. People don't work like that. Our communities don't work like that either. So give things a crack. Also, own your whiteness. People who don't come from multicultural communities, own your whiteness and recognize that you actually have very little to lose. People who come from non-Anglo backgrounds have the most critical understanding of whiteness as a concept, because we have to navigate and we have to exist around it. So we know how it works. Recognize that you have privilege. It's not a bad thing. I think it's just acknowledgement, and it shows that you're trying to do the work. And it's okay to pass the mic and sometimes go like, this is out of my depth. I don't know what we're talking about. We're trying to engage with community, but we don't know what we're doing. We'll pass it on to someone who has the knowledge. So that goes a long way.
All right, fantastic, everyone. That was awesome, really awesome. Yeah, and role models, they're really important because they're really what paved the way, like Naomi said. And then seeing that effect from your cause, I reckon, like Ikram was saying, that's the key in building that trust throughout your community and making sure everybody depends on everyone, right? All right, fantastic, thanks. And from Angela, our next question, how can we continue to expand this work and bring more people to the table who aren't as frequently represented in the multicultural community? For example, Pacific communities, First Nations communities, or even Anglo-European communities. Panel.
Happy to jump and take that one on. I don't think those people are not the table. I just think we need to change what the table looks like or how the table is set up, right? Pacifican communities, Anglo-European communities, African, South Asian, Southeast Asian, East Asian communities, they are doing the work. They are reaching out to the communities. They are talking to the people. They know what's working. They know what's not working. We've just set up a very colonial table. That doesn't work. So just change the entire dining table setup. That's what you need to do. So don't expect them to work around you or work around them. And so do things differently as well and recognize that there are certain values that underpin different cultural groups as well. It's often respect, listening to the elders. There are different codes and different cultural norms as to how communication works as well. So try and understand those nuances before you engage with communities. But I think those communities already exist and a lot of the fantastic work is being done. And those communities will come to the table if you form genuine friendships with them. I think a lot of multicultural groups just recognize the tokenism of being like, oh, we have one person from here and one person from there. Get rid of the tokenism and just genuinely build friendships and develop cross-cultural partnerships to understand how you can assist each other. And then you can all enjoy a great big meal together.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah. Any thoughts on that, Kana or Ikram?
I was going to say, I think sometimes I think Angela, great question. Nice to see your name again. I don't know. I was going to say face, but name. I know in Melbourne, especially in Victoria, specific Pacific communities, they do a lot of work there, and even the First Nations. I think sometimes it's an issue of our sector where there's great work being happening in silos, and then there isn't a lot of that collaboration. So I think to bring those voices, I think there needs to be more collaboration because I think there's little pieces of work happening all across the community sector, but there is no like space that brings us together. So I think a big part of bringing the voices is reaching out to those organizations and having that collaboration piece happening. Because sometimes I think, looking at funding models, sometimes it is just that results in the silo that we see, but I think we need to create spaces for that collaboration to happen. I think that's my take on it, Aarnav.
Yeah, sweet. Yeah, we really need that kind of environment where people can feel comfortable to talk about, what's going on and have that collaboration occurring. Any thoughts, Ikram?
Yeah, I might just add one tiny thing as well, especially when it comes to reaching hardly reached communities. And what I mean by that as well is when it comes to like engaging young multicultural people, there sometimes are young people that, see themselves as leaders and are more than happy to put their hand up when it comes to either consultations or engaging with government or engaging with different community centers. But I think, one of the biggest things is trying to engage, young people who might not necessarily view themselves as a leader or might not view themselves as advocates because their sort of opinions are just as important as well. So I think the biggest way to ensure that happens is sort of what Nayonika was saying earlier is like not just having that table and just assuming that's the way that we have to go. No, we have to be flexible. We have to ensure that we are considering all the different sort of things that may be in the way. I was sort of having a look at some of the chats and questions and there was things around gender. I know, for example, growing up there was expectation where you come from after school, you have to have different things, home responsibilities that you have to do, and a lot of consultations happen 4 to 5, 4 to 6, and then you're not hearing from those perspectives. So I think it's a really big thing where we have to consider how we involve young people, whether it's flexibility, whether it's involving young people in the co-design of those different consultations or initiatives or strategies or whatever that may look like as well.
Sorry, can I pop in a word if that's okay?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah. Yes. I used to work at the electoral department, and one of the things that was big for us when we try to reach multicultural communities and was that we are the problem. These communities, they're not the issue. They're not. It's not where we as an institution we struggle to reach to them. I think having that twist of rather than putting the blame on the communities and putting that blame on the institution or the system or the organization, that made it a big shift in us as an organization. When we did these outreach educational sessions on elections, it wasn't the community's fault where they were. It was our fault as an institution. We couldn't serve them. So I think even having that mental switch in the organization or advocating for that, we are the problem. We need to figure out a way to reach them. That played a big part in the work that we used to do at the commission department.
Yeah, nah, for sure. I reckon institutional accountability, it's probably the key step towards, getting in some real change, some real progress. Sweet. Okay, so we've got one more question for today because that's all we've got time for, unfortunately. And I think piggybacking off what Ikram was just saying a little bit before, from Kate, we have a question. How has the intersection of gender and being a migrant or refugee background impacted on your advocacy experience? And yeah, off you go. Any ideas?
Uh, this is a big question. I think the answer is it impacts you in ways that you can see, and it impacts you in ways that you can't see, but you understand with time because you have the benefit of hindsight. But it does impact you. You also have a lot of constant learning to do as well, which is understanding the interaction of gender identity presentation as well, because it's not just these demographic labels that you have, it's also the interaction of all of these labels with each other that you have to navigate. I always tell people that if you have to have the world's best detectives, it's ethnic kids, right? It's because we can navigate all of these things and we know how these things work and we know how intercultural, intergroup communication works as well. So there are a lot of rules, unwritten, unsaid, that go into doing a lot of the advocacy work. Like I can recognize that there are spaces where my voice as a woman is not respected. Um, I know there are spaces where my label or identity as a queer person is not respected or appreciated. I often get told I don't look disabled enough. Um, there are a lot of different things that affect you as well. So I think the biggest struggle that I have experienced is the justification for all of these labels that I adopt. And it's really hard to explain how dehumanizing that can feel, but it does feel very dehumanizing because you have to constantly perform. And like we discussed before, you don't know whose rules you're performing against. And community itself is still evolving to understand what queerness, what disabled inclusion, what environmental inclusion, what, an ecocentric perspective looks like. So you've got all of these internal struggles as well with no clear answer within community. You go seeking answers externally as well. So I think there's definitely space to acknowledge that there's often a big level of grief that multicultural young people experience within themselves. Because there's just no one you can talk to sometimes. You can talk to certain people, but that's because we've created spaces like this. I now have the benefit of having colleagues like Kana and Ikram and Angela and so many other people that I can be like, look, this is an experience you understand. Can I have a yarn about this? But I guess when I started doing a lot of this work years ago, because I'm not that young anymore, it looked different. We didn't have the comfort of being able to speak to each other. And we didn't have the comfort of, community coming out in support as well sometimes and showing a lot of that support. But having said that, we still struggle with community. I still get told when I'm speaking openly about my queerness or my disability from community that it's not accepted within community. But I also have people within community going, "We love you regardless." So it's a very difficult situation to be in. The impact is that I have to deal with internalized, I guess, xenophobia, whatever sort of phobia it is. I have to deal with internalized grief. I have to deal with the fact that, I am probably setting or paving the way for a lot of mental health resources for younger people in my sort of community or who have similar lived experiences because I'm making it out of this stage. They don't have to go through this, but then a lot of the people before me didn't have that benefit. So I think there's a lot of recognition that there's a lot of weakness, but also a lot of concurrent strength that I have to have. And I'm learning as I go as well. So I will get some things right and I will get some things wrong. And I have to have, I guess, the grace to accept that when I made a mistake, I accept that with grace and just apologize and recognize that nothing is ill-intentioned. It's a really hard spot to be in, but if anyone else has a response, I'd love to hear this.
Thanks, Nayonika. Yeah, for sure. No, you obviously are one of our pillars, one of our role models. So we're looking at you. You're one of our pioneers. So, you making those mistakes for us, we appreciate that. Cool. Kano, or Ikram, any thoughts on this one?
I'm going to take a different angle real quick. I think gender plays a massive factor. For my context, I come from my cultural background, from somewhat of a very conservative background. And so I think I found it like seeing what happens in the household, seeing what happens in my family household, it's very tough to see that and then come into a forum where in our sector to advocate for, for equal rights or to advocate for things like that. I can see it can be very challenging, especially when you're advocating to see how certain things at home play out or your culture plays out, and then to see how it plays out in forums like this. It can be very challenging because you feel like, again, you're dealing between two different identities. But I think it's being open as an advocate, being open to those ideas, and then finding where you fit into that as well. And I think, especially in the advocacy role, one of the always things that's at the forefront of my mind is who are the people who are not in this room? Who are the people whose views are not whose views and points are not heard? And also, what is my privilege? I know my privilege as a man is very, very different to someone else. So I think, one, it's being aware of the unconscious way that you've been growing up, right? Whether that's your home values, whether it's your cultural values, being aware of those. And then secondly, when you come into the advocacy space, it's knowing, all right, whose voices are not here, then whose voices, due to my privilege, are being limited, or due to my privilege, can I bring to the discussion as well? So I think that gender plays a massive factor in the advocacy as a multicultural young person, because I think a lot of us come from conservative backgrounds compared to Australia. So I think it's one, de-working that in a way, de-working that and figure out, all right, what's the correct way to go about this, and then bringing those views to the discussion table. And it is definitely hard. You're not going to get it perfect, as Nayonika said. It's a work in progress, but I think it's definitely plays a massive factor. It's important to have that intersection because we know multiculturalism is just not one bucket. It's complex. It is weird. It is confusing. Even me working in the sector now, you're not going to get it correct. But the best thing we can do is knowing what views do I represent, what views do I not represent, and those not represented views, how can I bring them to the fold? Whether that's connecting people, whether that's having friends in different departments who can bring into the fold. I'll leave it there.
Cheers, thank you, Kana. Yeah, for sure. Making sure that your privilege is there to let those unspoken voices be heard. It's really important. Any final thoughts, Ikram?
Yes, I know. I feel like Connor and Nayonika summed it up really well. But if there was one thing that I would probably really emphasize is that in many of our different cultures, especially when it comes to like gendered cultural expectations, they definitely exist. But what we definitely need to do is challenge it. If we don't challenge it and we don't, take those steps, nothing will change. So I think that's one of my biggest things where it's like we just got to make sure that in different spaces that we do enter, that we ensure that we are, really taking that next step. I think it's really important because it is very easy to be like, this is what my culture thinks. Like for context as well, I'm from a Somali background, and in our culture, women have a lot of caring roles and the men are the ones that make the decisions when it comes to what happens in our community. But if, myself and others, like women in my community, are not the ones who are taking that step, nothing will change. So I think, the whole concept around what we're here today is making sure our voices are heard. So in order to make those changes and next steps, we really do have to, I guess, ensure that we're changing and making that impact the way that we can as well. Some people, it could be, very advocacy based, policy based. Some people would, go into whether it's activism, and whatever way that you decide to go into it, it's very important to challenge these sort of ways that we think as well.
Yeah, for sure. Your roots kind of inform your activism and how you, go around dealing with these issues. Thank you very much, everyone. These were fantastic questions. But unfortunately, we are out of time for our Q&A. So I'll now be throwing over to Kate from MYAN for a few words.
Hi, everyone. It has been lovely to listen to the panelists and to see all of the really intelligent questions coming in through the chat. Kate, I'm from the Multicultural Youth Advocacy Network, MYAN for short, joining from traditional Bunurong land today. And I just wanted to say thank you for joining today. We had so many registrations, which really makes us feel really excited to see how many people are interested in hearing and listening and asking questions and engaging. So maybe this is just the beginning of something. I'd like to congratulate the amazing young people that have been brought through AYAC as well for doing this amazing organizing, leading this doing all the work and all the meetings before, acknowledging your work. And I hope that you are very proud of yourself and what you've accomplished today. I'm just really happy about this collaborative effort between MYAN and AYAC. I'll just pass it on to Dean to just say a few words and wrap up.
Yeah, I was gonna see if I could get away without speaking at all, but I seen a question in the chat, and I was kind of like, oh, I should probably maybe try and get to that question a little bit. But before I do, I'd just like to thank the guys for the facilitation, for Takanu, Ikram, and Nayonika for showing up today and giving us their time, but also to all the young people that actually work behind the scenes to make this happen. Because as Kate was saying, there was a lot of planning went into this. And that's part of the reason why I wanted to sort of jump on to sort of maybe answer one of those questions that was in the chat that we didn't get to. And that question was like, what can I do to feel involved if I'm not so sure? So basically, like as Aarnav said at the start of the day, this all came out of a program that we ran called Campaign. And with Campaign, what we wanted to do was we wanted to give young people that maybe haven't had experience of advocacy roles or were trying to feel their way into it, that little introduction and give them that opportunity to really develop their ideas and do something concrete in the real world. So if you are sort of looking out there, looking to get involved, but not really sure where to start, I'm now going to sound like a really cheap salesman. We're relaunching Campaign next week. So we'll be come back out with that program again. So if that's something that you want to do, sign up and hopefully we'll see you on that call. But that's all I really wanted to say. And thanks to all the guys who've been involved with today. So I suppose that's us, isn't it? Like on your way. It's basically the weekend for everybody now, isn't it? Thanks very much, guys. Oh, and can the people who were involved, like Aarnav and all the rest of it, can you stay behind a little bit so if we can have a chat? But otherwise, guys, you are free to be on your way. The event is at a close.
Thanks.